talking a little bit about CBDCs and digital dollars in just a little bit. Roger, do you want to give the audience a little preview of what our panel in just a little while will look like?
Yeah, I mean, 3 p.m., on the orange stage, we're going to be talking about central bank digital currencies, stable coins, kind of that intersect. And, the short summary of it is probably CBDC bad, Bitcoin good. But we are going to go into a little bit more detail than that and kind of talk about the evolving state. And there definitely are a lot of countries trying to integrate and research central bank digital currency, so important to keep track.
Super. Hello, everybody. Just want to check. Vivian, are we good to go? All right, I see a thumbs up, so that means we are going to dive right in because I have three brilliant minds to my right, and I want to get as much out of them as possible for all of you guys. I'm actually slightly nervous to be in this position. I feel like this is going to be sort of a bit of a waterfall of knowledge. I am not this gentleman right here, Craig Deutsch. Unfortunately, Craig, who is one of the organizers for this event, his town, Asheville, North Carolina, has been hit very, very hard by Hurricane Helene, or was hit very hard. From the main stage the other day, I shared a Geyser Fund site where you can donate some Bitcoin via Lightning to Craig and his community. So if you can look up Hurricane Helene Geyser Fund relief, and you want to donate to that, please feel free to do so. The money will go to good use. On that note, let us move forward here. So we have a panel. We're going to be talking about digital dollars, so CBDCs and stablecoins. We'll be touching on both, and how these things are being implemented and used around the world. To my right, we have Freddie New, so co-founder of Bitcoin Policy UK. And please, I'm going to give them each an introduction to introduce themselves in case I miss anything. Efrat Fenigson, host of You're the Voice podcast, and Roger Huang, author of Woodmow, Hold Bitcoin, and contributor to Bitcoin Magazine and Forbes. Actually, let's do it like this. Let's actually, as you introduce yourself, maybe talk about your area of specialty as far as your knowledge about CBDCs and maybe stablecoin use around the world. Roger, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I've been writing about Bitcoin since 2014 and have been writing, one of the first writers about the digital yuan, which is the world's kind of most advanced implementation of central bank digital currency. So happy to speak about that as well as stablecoin usage in China.
So I'm an independent journalist and the host of You're the Voice podcast and a marketing expert. One of my strange hobbies is going through central banks' documents about CBDCs and analyzing them and writing a bit about it or talking about it, or just simply looking at what the government's doing around the world with CBDCs and filming some videos to rant.
I like that. Provocative videos, if you will. Yes.
I'm a lawyer by training, so in addition to co-founding Bitcoin Policy UK, I wrote a lot of our papers for the Bank of England, for HMRC, the FCA, HMRC, and so on. And like Efrat, I have an unusual hobby. Mine is going through central bank documentation, reading about how money is created.
This is an exciting group, no? This is good stuff. I like it. Efrat, I'm going to go over to you first. You recently made a video that went viral about what's happening right now in Israel with CBDCs, their creation, and also the removal of physical cash from the system. You also published a piece in Bitcoin Magazine about this. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So there were 4 parts to a plan that was disclosed by the Israeli government recently, saying that they want to abolish cash gradually in Israel. They first started talking about taking out the 200 shekel note out of circulation, which is very similar to what has happened in India in 2016, which had devastating outcomes. Secondly, they said they're going to use AI to monitor and enforce tax evasion as part of this new bill that they're suggesting. Thirdly, they said they're going to ban any use of cash substitutes like gold and silver, for example. And the fourth thing in the plan was to ban any cryptocurrency related to terror acts. This whole plan is related to trying to fight black money and financial crimes. That's what the official excuse is. There was a big mayhem in Israel after this plan was exposed. People really resisted. A lot of people created content about it and said that they're not accepting the abolition of cash. And so the Bank of Israel came out with an official note shortly after and said, okay, we take it back. It's not going to happen. It's our jurisdiction to do that, not the government. And for now, we're telling you that we're not going to abolish the 200 shekel note. They didn't mention all the other stuff, only the 200 shekel note. but as you already know, they may say no now, but that was an overtone window that opened, that is already instilled in the population, and Israel may be going cashless alongside the acceleration of the CBDC projects that are going very well in Israel. And one of the funny things that happened recently is when the vice governor of the Central Bank of Israel was asked for the timeline of the CBDC launch, when is it going to be launched, he chose a very interesting example to answer that and said, you remember in 2018 in the Bahamas, they had a hurricane, that it took down their financial system, and then when they came back up, they had to launch the CBDC as the new monetary system. That's the example he chose. And he said, I really hope we're not going to see a similar emergency in Israel, which will justify the release of CBDC. But out of all things that he could have said, that's what he chose. So, you know, very telling.
It's worth mentioning that the sand dollar that they use in the Bahamas, I think that was offline for something like 180 days though. So that's actually
failure, right?
You know, complete failure. That's a nice example to cite as real world evidence of that these things don't work, and if they stop working, it can be catastrophic if you rely on them.
And I appreciate that. Roger, I'm going to kick it to you. Please feel free to finish up with that, but I want to throw a question in there as well. The sand dollar also, there was no real adoption even when it was online. There were not people organically adopting it once they put it out until they sort of forced people to use it. But I want to sort of just give you this as well as you respond. China is a place where I would say digital currencies, CBDCs, they are gaining some traction. Some of that is by force. Not completely gaining traction, but gaining maybe a little more traction. Plus, it is, you know, it's a powerhouse in the world, and if they wanted to apply force to make more people use it, I'm assuming that would be fairly easy, and then other countries might follow suit. So please feel free to first respond and maybe comment on that a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't really have too many comments on the sand dollar. I think probably what I heard is probably a bad thing. Moving on to China and the digital yuan. I think that, like Efrat, I also have the distinction of reading a lot of obscure central bank documents, and they happen to be in Mandarin, and they happen to be super, super obscure. And I think there are more lies than truth, but anyways. So digital yuan has been around since 2014 research started as part of the Digital Currency Research Institute. It is the most advanced central bank digital currency in the world. It's currently in 29 cities. People say it's a pilot, but really it's pretty much active. You can use it on the Beijing Metro along with other different places. I think that China is going to have a leading international role in the spread of central bank digital currencies. What I've been trying to tell people is that if you think of it as a fight between CBDC standards, between the yuan, why would you study China at all? Well, China is actually part of the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Hub, is the leading member in putting research together on actual and proposed central bank digital currency. The Bank of International Settlements is a central bank for central banks. About 80% plus of its members have expressed an interest in creating a central bank digital currency in their own country. So if you think, you know, that it's just in China, it's either coming to you now or it might be coming to you later. The Bank of International Settlements, the Innovation Hub, has allowed China to create standards for central bank digital currencies that are spreading around the world, as well as projects such as Project M-Bridge, a quote-unquote blockchain ledger that will take multi-CBDC portals between China and central banks such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And last year we saw the purchase of oil from the United Arab Emirates using the ECNY. And so there's definitely a lot of concerning and rapid development of these trends. Now, what you said, Frank, in terms of like the popularity within China, I think one of the things is like when you ask a central bank that's used to like dictating with paper to become essentially a tech company, that doesn't work as well. And so in China, digital payments are usually dominated by two companies, WeChat, the Tencent group, and then Alibaba. And those two companies have a lot more traction than the ECNY. But also the way the ECNY works, which is the Chinese digital yuan, doesn't offer any interest rate. It's pegged 1-to-1 with the Chinese yuan. So why would you use it in any sense of the word? And we've seen in the pilots that the Chinese government has expired funds. And if we're talking about government failures, you know, along the lines of the sand dollar, the Chinese government, for example, the Shanghai police, have leaked databases of 1.1 billion people's information. So this is all central points of failure, surveillance and control, and something that's being attempted to be set as a standard around the world.
Appreciate that. Speaking of around the world, let's swing it back to the UK. So we have someone who studies what's happening right now with the creation of a CBDC in the UK. And last week we were talking a little bit about this, and you very much considered the lines of defense against something like this. So while it can be a little bit anxiety-provoking to know that governments are so actively working on this, I think it's also maybe empowering to think about ways to potentially counter it and what the lines of defense look like. Would you mind speaking a little bit about that, Freddie?
Yeah, of course. I think to set the stage here, it's important to remember that the creation of a CBDC is a political matter. It's not really a financial one. There's no good and coherent financial reason to create these instruments, and a lot of the research that's actually happened in the UK on this subject has supported that view. The most famous and probably the best written piece that I'd recommend people look at is the House of Lords report on this, and the title to it is Central Bank Digital Currencies, a Solution in Search of a Problem. And it's worth reading that in detail, and then also, if you can get hold of it, the transcript of the debate that took place in Parliament afterwards. And it's actually quite encouraging to see that there's a lot of political opposition to the creation of CBDCs, even within the UK, not least from a man called Mervyn King, who used to be governor of the Bank of England, who came up quite strongly against them. In fact, I'm going to get this quote wrong, but it was along the lines of, there doesn't appear to be any problem to which a CBDC is the obvious answer. This, of course, is because Mervyn King doesn't want to monitor and control people. If you do want to monitor and control people, then CBDCs are brilliant. But return to my first point, the fact that their creation is a matter of politics, not of finance. In the UK, at least, and potentially in other countries as well, our current laws don't allow the Bank of England to create a CBDC without there being a change in law first. And that comes to your line of defence. That's the real first line in the sand. Because it's a political matter, no change in law can be made until both houses agree, and that law is probably passed in Parliament. So our initial response is to go very hard against your politicians, against your representatives, letting them know your views, getting as involved as you possibly can do in making it clear to them that as a voting population, we do not want this. If the law is eventually passed, which, being cynical and depressive, it quite possibly will be.
Please.
Yeah, just rile everyone up. If it is eventually passed, then I think the second line of defence is what I think Roger, you may be able to correct me on this, but I think a lot of government officials who are paid for the digital yuan will...
They were, yeah. They were trying to get off it though, really quick. Even if you're a government official, you probably don't want to be holding too much ECY.
Well, exactly. So you flip it into fiat, you buy Bitcoin with it, if we're allowed to do so. And then I think the third and final line of defence is one more of self-preservation. This is you recognise that you live in an adversarial world where you're heavily KYC'd and subject to very stringent AML regulation, and you want to learn how to use an alternative like Bitcoin before you have to. I think what I'd like to ensure is that as many people know how to use Bitcoin as safely and as privately and securely as they possibly can, because the last thing I want to see is, you go to your butcher's to buy a steak and you find that your money doesn't work because you've eaten too much red meat that week, which is exactly the kind of programmability risk that comes with the CBDC.
Appreciate that. So you're saying essentially ability to censor the transactions you're making because the government has certain data about you, like, oh, you've gone to that butcher too many times, and maybe according to certain standards you're overweight, so that's enough red meat for you.
Well, I'm conscious that I may be overweight myself.
Yeah, I think Freddie is our fourth line of defense, so I hope everybody's aware of that. Yeah. I want to go back to you, Efrat. You're very known for telling hard truths. And there are people that do that but don't necessarily put their face to that, and you do that. What are you trying, when you're sharing what you're sharing, what do you hope the intended outcome is? So you're sharing this information about what's happening. As Freddie said, there are lines of defenses. Are you hoping to sort of give people a call to action when it comes to this stuff?
I actually think that is a line of defense, because the more people speak about what CBDC is and what the capabilities are and what kind of realities we could live in if we have a CBDC standard in our lives, the more people will become aware of it. Because when was the last time that you heard mainstream media talking to the public about CBDC? They don't do that. You have one campaign that I see running in the EU by Christine Lagarde, shilling the digital euro, telling you that it's the best thing since sliced bread. but no one is criticizing it. You don't get any criticism from the mainstream publication or mainstream TV channels, so people simply don't know what that is, and it's coming, whether we like it or not. So I think it is another line of defense to just go out there and speak about it, whether to speak about the scary and uncomfortable stuff, or speak about just facts, just the stuff that they are publishing in their documents. And each one of the people here are great sources to follow and take that information from and just chew it on to your environments and your communities. So yeah, for me, it's another line of defense.
Appreciate that. I want to quickly swing it over to you, Roger, to talk a bit about stablecoins. So some people have said stablecoins, or the debate between stablecoins and CBDCs is kind of like a red herring. Maybe that stablecoins are sort of already the CBDCs. Obviously, they're on public blockchains. We can trace these things pretty easily. But there's also a different dynamic with stablecoins in China, right? It's almost like a bit of a competitor to Bitcoin, right, as an alternative currency. A lot of people use USDT Tether, and then we have Bitcoin. So are stablecoins sort of, the first question, are they sort of the initial version of the CBDC? And then two, is it really a competitor to Bitcoin, and is this something to worry about?
Well, I think, my thesis on it is that in the West, the Western bloc, you're seeing people pulling away from CBDCs. The Canadian Central Bank just said that they are going to pull away, partially because of survey results that show that government CBDCs are very unpopular among people. I think if you ask a survey question and you're just like, hey, do you want your government to be able to access and monitor and control how you spend your money? I think that's an incredibly unpopular proposition. But, when you have stuff that's privatized and it's like a private company, it can kind of be like a little bit fun. Like a lot of people who say Facebook, but before that it was LifeLogger, that was a CIA project, right? Like if you then bring that together under the guise of private money, it becomes a little bit more palatable. It becomes a little bit easier for people to kind of understand and maybe even accept a bit more than government controlling it directly. So I do think that ultimately, and you see, for example, regulators in the United States are super focused on regulating stablecoins, understanding them, passing the Stablecoin Act and things like that, so that they effectively act in a way where they're mediated with the government. And Tether has worked with US authorities in certain cases, right? So in China and in other countries, I encourage people to go around the world where there's the Eurodollar system. And what that really means is just people who use the US dollar without US banking. And it's so important to be able to access the perspectives of people who do that. And that's the case in China, it's the case in Turkey, that's the case in Iran. People who take their payments in USDT because they don't want their savings to be in the Iranian banking system, right? In China, most people will on-ramp and off-ramp into different exchanges using Tether. I just asked someone who has access to a mainland escrow service, and I just asked them how many merchants are there selling Bitcoin? And there was 6 or 7. And then I was like, how many of them are selling Tether? And there was 1,000 or something. It was infinite scroll, it didn't stop. And so a lot of people are using Tether to get into the ecosystem. I think this is partially this mentality of we live in a world where for many people outside the United States dollar is still a very secure model for them. They are suffering from currencies that are attacked by inflation every year, dramatic inflation that's not really seen right now, currently in the United States, right? For example, the Turkish lira, that is declining so rapidly in value every year. But I think what will eventually happen is that they will realize that the US dollar, obviously it's going to take a little bit longer, but the US dollar itself is vulnerable to those exact same manipulations and things that they're concerned about. It's just going to take a little bit of time for that all to come to pass.
I think that's true, and also I think we're printing, I think we're going $1 trillion into debt more every 100 days in the United States, so it might not take as much time as you're insinuating. We will see. Efrat, you wanted to comment though.
Yeah, I just want to say that Tether, Circle are specific cases, private companies heavily involved with the governments in order to, they're becoming systemically important, as you said before. It's true, but then I think another trend we're going to see related to stablecoins is that almost every nation is going to be working on its own official stablecoin alongside developing their CBDC platform. And so as a marketeer and a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, my theory is that we will probably be seeing a lot of states doing both. And if the public reaction is too much of a resistance, revolting against CBDC, they're going to come out and say, oh, okay, we've listened to you. We're not going to launch CBDC. Look at Trump. Trump in Nashville, what did he say? Not on my watch, there's not going to be any CBDC, but I am working on an official stablecoin for the United States, right? So if you know how to pay attention and read between the lines, they could just flip that plan into that plan, and in reality the difference in features, technological features and abilities between CBDC and stablecoin is very small. Okay, so we can have an instance of a CBDC in the form of a stablecoin, an official stablecoin of the country. And Israel is now working on one called Bills. Australia launched last year. NAB, National Australian Bank, has launched a stablecoin, an official one, to do cross-border payments with stablecoin. And NGN in Nigeria, CNGN in Nigeria, it's still in the works. So there are some beginnings for those kind of projects as well. I'm just saying, let's be on the lookout for that trend too.
Appreciate that. Freddie, over to you, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so picking up what you said there, for me, the key risk in a CBDC is really financial censorship and monitoring. And both of those risks, I think, are also true of the majority of stablecoins. So you need to ask, can this balance be frozen in this UTXO or UTXO equivalent? Can an address be frozen? What kind of monitoring are the companies able to apply to the users of that currency? And the Venn diagram of most stablecoins on a CBDC will look like a circle. So to the extent that they are susceptible to the same risks, I think we should treat them with the same amount of skepticism. Recognizing, as we were discussing earlier, Fred, that in many countries, stablecoins are extraordinarily useful. People want to use the dollar because their own currency is collapsing. So I think we also need to have a degree of sympathy with people who need to use those instruments and who maybe can't take the risk of being exposed to the volatility of Bitcoin's price.
Absolutely.
It's the good with the bad. That's what stablecoin is. We just have to be aware of that. And in Australia, I must add that it was on an Ethereum blockchain with smart contracts with the stablecoin. So yeah,
I think those can be frozen.
I think we're seeing now with companies like Ripple and Hedera who have talked about, being very open about working with governments. Another thing with stablecoins that a lot of people don't recognize is that in some ways they're even worse than CBDCs, in that when you send someone some money from your stablecoin balance, that's now on a public ledger if it is on Ethereum, let's say. So you're basically exposing your bank account to the broader public on top of the fact that these things are censorable. But Circle has even terms and conditions. People think you can spend USDC as freely as you want. You can't. There are certain stores where it won't even be accepted. So that already exists, despite the fact that they're on permissionless, quote-unquote, blockchains. I want to talk a little bit about, I know that all of you also have some knowledge and some expertise, as you've already hinted at, Efrat, talking about other places around the world where you're noticing things happening with stablecoins. I think, Efrat, you mentioned something about Thailand. What was happening there? If you want to touch on that.
Very interesting. In Thailand, the first pilot was completed successfully last year. It was a 6-month pilot, and then a week ago, the second pilot started. Because the first one was so successful, the second one was launched for 50 million low-income earners, $14 billion, giving away free money, $280 for every person who participates in the pilot, which is 10,000 baht, which is quite a bit of money for the average Thai. With that money, they can use it, they program the money, so they can use it to buy groceries and essential things. They cannot use it to buy fuel, tobacco, alcohol. They can use it in 4 kilometers radius from their house. The official excuse is that we want to stimulate the economy, the local community and the economy. And there's an expiry date of 6 months on the money. And everyone that participates in this pilot program has to be registered in the taxation system of the state, and many of the Thai people are not. And this is 50 million people. They onboarded a lot of millions already. It's going very fast. It's going pretty well. I'm following it. It doesn't look good. 2 things that are happening in parallel to the launch of that second pilot, which is huge, is the rollout of a digital ID in Thailand, and the second one is carbon climate taxing. They're both going out in parallel. They have some linkage between them, because if you want to be part of the CBDC pilot, you do have to have a digital ID. It's linking to that system. And with the carbon, the climate stuff, you can see that you may be throttled if you reach some quotas in terms of your climate-related expenses.
We have about 6 minutes left here, and as you can tell, we have a panel that's very well versed in this. So it's very difficult to get to everything we wanted to talk about. So I want to leave the floor open a little bit here, Roger. Please feel free to sort of talk about something that we haven't touched on already, something that you feel is important for the audience to know, or I would love to have you comment on something that Efrat was just getting at there. Eventually the government can set certain terms in conjunction with social ID, right, to force people to use these things or to penalize people for using these tools. So feel free to comment on that or something else you feel that we should take away from this talk.
Yeah, I think central bank digital currencies are an important stack in what I would term to be, or other people have termed to be, a techno-authoritarian stack. And the idea is that if people know how you transfer your value, how you save funds, they can censor your funds, they can do so much more. In China, for example, when there were protests, people were targeted for protesting their banks, which essentially some of them were a Ponzi scheme of sorts. And their COVID codes were turned red so they could not go out. And so we should be very, very aware and very wary of giving the state more access and more control, especially as states have more and more of what they call states of emergency and states of exception. We've seen it before with the pandemic and things like that before. Mark my words, there will be more situations like this, and it is so important to remember those fundamental properties of Bitcoin that make it distinguishable, unique, censorship-proof, and something that can be used to fight against the adoption of CBDCs.
Freddie, we recently had a conversation talking about how oftentimes what brings people to Bitcoin is pain instead of intellectual curiosity, right? So it's not that people are like, oh, this Bitcoin thing is interesting. Let me spend some time reading this white paper and then 100 hours learning about it. Do you have confidence? So you talked about lines of defense. Do you have confidence that in the UK you're going to see people, and I'm just speaking, that's the jurisdiction in which you live, where you're from. Do you feel like you're going to see people push back when they really feel their rights impeded upon?
Yes, but unfortunately, probably not until they've already experienced the pain. It's a truism to say that if you need to have Bitcoin explained to you, you probably don't need it yet. People who need Bitcoin don't need to understand how it works. They don't need to understand anything about it. They just know that they can send money freely to whoever they want to send it to. And maybe perhaps that's echoing Roger slightly. That's where I'd probably like to finish. I don't think certainly in the UK, very few of our politicians and regulators fully understand that Bitcoin is unstoppable money, that used properly, a transaction cannot be stopped. That is completely alien to the way these people's minds work. They always assume there's a CEO, there's a company they can call, there's a bank they can ring up, they can say, freeze this person's account, it will be frozen. As a result of this, AML and KYC and financial gatekeeping generally has been predominantly delegated to financial institutions, which is why banks and other financial institutions do a lot of the police work for governments. What I would like to see in a hopeful scenario is a world where governments realize that in a universe where unstoppable money exists, there cannot be those kind of financial gatekeepers anymore, and they will have to police crime in a better way than they currently do. I'd like to see Bitcoin as a conduit to a world without financial gatekeepers, because of course Bitcoin itself has no gatekeepers at all. But again, return to your original point, I have a feeling that until people have experienced the pain, they're not going to see the benefits.
I appreciate that. Efrat, we've talked about this, but you do what you can to sort of educate people about this. Is it possible, given the range of the audience that you have, the size of the audience, to have to reach people before they get to this point, this pain point, and what has been effective in terms of putting a message out there that seems to catalyze people, move them into action?
What's effective is really to take their words, the bankers' words, and put them out there to make it very clear for people what they're doing. So for example, this is my recent tweet. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, has just put out last month a document which is the framework for how they're going to roll out CBDC, and they call it READY. Are you ready? Regulation, education, design, and incentives. That's what READY stands for. And I say that this is bribing, propaganda, coercion, and that's what they're going to do to roll out CBDC. So I put the diagram out there and I showed people, are you ready? This is what they're bringing on. So just do that and just buy Bitcoin.
This lady right here.
All right. We have to bring this one in, so let me start from Roger. We'll come back right across this way. Roger, Efrat, Freddie, final thoughts. Maybe a last call to action, much like Efrat just gave us. Just buy Bitcoin. We know that too. Any final thoughts though?
Study up, buy Bitcoin, and transfer with freedom.
Love it. We can stick with Efrat's final point, unless you have anything to add to it.
No, you rock. The fact you're here, the fact that you're in Bitcoin says everything about you.
I love that. Freddie, take it home for us.
I'm just going to reward you by not quoting any more Bank of England papers. So I'll leave you there, sir.
Love it. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Please follow Roger, Efrat, and Freddie online. Sincerely appreciate it.
Het gaat hier vandaag over saamhorigheid.
Dagje zonder hemel. Rustig, liegt niet. Wat normaal maken is wat niet normaal.
Every
Alleen
nation
maar blauwe
in
lucht.
every region now has a decision to make.
En dan ook geen hel meer.
You think I'm joking? Predator
Dat
drones.
is best makkelijk.
You will never see it coming.
Wat dacht je, alle mensen?
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.
Bezig met vandaag.